So good morning, everybody. Come on, it's not that early. All right, so welcome to our talk, The Future of Microsoft Azure, Managing Your Cloud Apps in the New Azure Portal. My name is Michael Washington.
Sydney Andrews.
We are with Agility. We're a training company that focuses on Microsoft Azure. Real quick show of hands before we get started. How many of you are current Microsoft Azure users today? That's crazy, everyone. Awesome. How many of you use the preview portal?
How many use the preview portal all the time?
That guy. Okay, so good information to know. So what we're going to do, it sounds like everyone already kind of knows the introduction, so we'll kind of gloss over that one a little bit. But the rest of the session, we're going to focus on three different scenarios. So we're going to talk about how you can use Azure and the Azure Management Portal from an enterprise management and monitoring perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can use it with an integrated DevOps experience. And finally, we're going to show some of the new stuff that was announced last week at Build with Azure Resource Manager. Did everyone see the Azure Resource Manager with VMs last week? A few people? So pretty neat stuff. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the end of it just to kind of show some demos and kind of how it works. So to get started, everyone already knows Azure, apparently, because everyone raised their hand. But so just kind of a real quick recap, because I'm sure there's someone out there that's relatively new to the platform. Whenever you think of Azure, you're thinking of two different platform or cloud models. You have infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, or PaaS. So on the IS side, this is virtual machines, virtual networks, underlying storage infrastructure, hybrid connectivity, connecting your on-prem data center to the cloud, or your virtual networks in the cloud to other virtual networks in the cloud. On the right side is PaaS, the PaaS services like web applications, mobile apps, databases as a service, et cetera. These are all components that are designed to allow your developers to build and compose applications and not really worry about the underlying infrastructure because it's managed by the service itself. And of course, on top of these two compute models, you have a common programming models and tools. So Azure is a very open platform. So in addition to what you would expect with SDKs for .NET Framework with C# and VB, you have PHP, you have Python, you have Ruby, you have C++ libraries. It's meant to be opened and consumed by everyone. And on top of that, of course, is the integrated DevOps experience, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So one other thing I want to kind of throw out here, because some of the demos we're going to show today are going to use resource groups extensively. So if you've never used a resource group, I just want to kind of give a real high-level overview of what this is. It's essentially a logical container for resources that you provision in Azure. So think of it kind of like a folder on your file system. You can deploy resources such as virtual machines, SQL databases. It is IS and PaaS. It's not just one or the other like you have in the old model. And what it gives you is the ability to monitor, to do identity, all at the resource group level, and even billing, et cetera. So it's a really powerful feature, and it's something that everyone will have to get used to as they go through and using the new preview portal. So speaking of the preview portal, it sounds like everyone's already done this, but just a real quick recap what it's used for. It's used for creating and managing cloud resources. So you use it to create VMs. You can now create virtual networks and configure them. For the most part, you actually have parity now with the previous portal in the IS space at least. And there's actually a lot of features that you can do in the preview portal that you can't do in the old management portal. So the parity is actually getting better and even stronger than it was in the previous version. You can also monitor workloads and configure alerts. Very customizable startboard and blades allows you to set up dashboards for monitoring whatever workloads you want. And it provides an integrated DevOps experience. You're going to see some really interesting integration with Visual Studio Online today, showing how to do commits and staging slots and all kinds of interesting things through the application lifecycle. And finally, it's one of the key pieces of the preview portal is the integration with the Azure Marketplace. So not only can you spin up, virtual machines and resources from Microsoft, you also have hundreds of Azure certified solutions that you can quickly spin up and use directly from with the same experience. So let's start off with our first scenario. Now, this scenario is based on probably the most popular company ever, at least at a Microsoft conference, Contoso. So this is a very fictitious scenario, just to kind of give you an idea of what you can do here. But Contoso in this example, say it's an enterprise customer based out of Texas. They have very traditional on-premise workloads like AD, Exchange, SQL. They run file servers. and they run dev and test environments on their own. They manage all the servers, and they spin them up and delete them, and they go through all the work of managing that environment. And they also have training servers, so they have a large footprint of servers that they use for SAP training or their own custom applications, et cetera. And just like every good enterprise customer, or every good enterprise, they're going to have a lot of field workers. So they have field workers based out of Dublin and London. These are all field remote users. Now, one of the problems with having a headquarters in Texas and field customers or field cells based out of Dublin and London is there's a really big ocean in between. So whenever users from London VPN in, they copy giant PDF files off of a file server, they complain. It's very slow. There's high latency. Well, they don't know what latency is maybe, but it's very slow. They know that, and they're not happy about it. And they're losing productivity trying to copy these giant files over. So another problem that's with this model is development and test. If you buy all this hardware, you have to maintain it. It will fail. It will age. You'll have to refresh it. And it's not very agile. If you bring on new workloads, new applications that you need to have an environment for, in a lot of enterprises that I've talked to for real, this takes anywhere from weeks to months to get a new environment provisioned. So not only is it not very agile, it's also not very cost effective because you may have to deploy a lot of hardware for a specific workload, and a lot of times it's just not even utilized. So there's only about 5 zillion solutions to all these problems, but say this company just wants to use the exact same solution, but they don't want to do anything different. They just want to make it a better experience. They don't want to change things. They don't want to invest in a cloud-based document management service. That would probably be a lot better. What they could do is they could take advantage of the fact that Azure has 19 regions globally worldwide, and instead of spinning up their own infrastructure in a colo or something like that, they literally could create a virtual network in North Europe, configure a site-to-site connection between on-prem and North Europe, and have their users VPN there and copy the files over. You lose the latency problem. It's all direct. You don't deploy new infrastructure. You don't need boots on the ground to manage the servers. It's all through Azure. So that's a pretty simple solution to a pretty hard problem. The second problem is line of business development and test. How do you become more agile without costing a lot of capital up front? And easy enough for this one as well as just another virtual network. Use virtual machines. The corporate users are all based in Texas, so deploying a virtual network in South Central, which it happens to also be in Texas, you have low latency connectivity to the virtual machines. Whenever they're not using them, they can either shut them down or just delete them. They're just resources up in the cloud. So these two simple solutions solve a lot of problems that this customer could experience. So let me jump out into the management portal and just kind of walk through what we could actually do to manage and monitor some of these solutions. So this is the Azure Preview Portal, and if you've ever just loaded it up, you've seen lots of busy icons, feedback, browse, help and support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just decided to clean it all up just to show that you can clean all that stuff up if you want to. It's real easy to customize, remove the tiles and everything to make it look like however you want. The one thing I did leave up is service health, and the reason there is because they actually made a recent change just in the past week or two, which basically this tile no longer shows you the service health of the entire platform, which could be good and could be bad depending on what you're doing. It shows you the service health of resources that impact you. So if your virtual machines are down in East US, it's going to show that there's a downside. Where if you don't have any resources at all in East US and it's still not down, it's not going to panic you. So that's one thing real quick to show. But now what I want to show is this scenario. We just deployed 2 virtual networks are connecting from Texas to South Central US and from South Central US to Europe. How do you know that stuff is up if you're the network admin and you just want to log in and make sure things didn't explode overnight? So one of the things you can do in a portal is you can create kind of a custom dashboard. So we can go into Browse Virtual Networks, and we can see that there are 2 virtual networks created here, one in North Europe and one in South Central. And I can open up North Europe, and on the VNet tab, I have the Essentials pane. And this is basically just going to give us some really quick information about the network. It'll tell us the resource group it's in, the location it's deployed to, what kind of routing the gateway is set to. But down, if I scroll down a little bit farther to the bottom, you can see some status. We can see the point-to-site settings and the site-to-site. So all I have to do if I just want to make a dashboard is just right-click on this, hit Pin to Start Board, And when I minimize all this, it'll all be available. Now, another operation or another tile that I'd probably want to monitor if I'm going to create a dashboard is the events. Events is basically an audit log of everything that happens in this virtual network. So someone logs in, they add a subnet, they remove a subnet, they delete the gateway, create a gateway, whatever. It's all captured right here. And this is actually pretty important, especially if you start seeing red failures here. It would be really nice to jump back through that audit log to figure out why it's failing. So I can do the same thing. And let me just, since we have two VNets, I'll just set this one up the same way.
While he's doing that, you can always collapse the essentials panel. So if it's getting in your way, you can just collapse it up. And you'll see the essentials panel on many different resources within the portal. It's really useful for getting the most used information. Usually, depending on what type of service it is, the essentials panel will show different data based upon what's the most popular information you need to look up very quickly without having to go through different blades.
Yep. So now that we have kind of our tiles up here on the dashboard, obviously, if this could be fine if you just, you don't mind things a little off-center, but I just can't do things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of rearrange these real quick. I can right-click, hit Customize, and now I can kind of drag the VNet under the right event setting. So South Central under South Central. That way it doesn't interact with my OCD tendencies. So now here we can, anytime, get a quick glance of what's going on with our network. Just not really complicated. It's just a nice dashboard. Now, one thing to know, these are live tiles. So if my site-to-site VNet does go down, that green icon will turn gray. It's not an instant live tile, so keep that in mind. Now, so right now it shows that both of my point-to-site connections are 0. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to one of them. And here in just a few minutes, we'll actually see one client connection there, and without actually refreshing the browser. Now, one real quick thing here. The reason we have a failure, let's find out. So if we open up the event logs, or the operation logs, you can see all the different operations that have happened on this VNet. So when I created it, when I added the subnet, when I created the gateway, et cetera. Now we can see this failure, and this is actually a pretty benign failure, but if something did catastrophic occur, you'd probably want to be able to know who did it and why it happened, or whether it was Azure or whatever. So here, when I'm looking at these logs, I can see who did the operation. So this was my Hotmail account when I was initially setting it up. If I scroll to the bottom, I can see what it is. The operation on virtual network, Contoso North Europe, gateway primary failed. There must be at least one client root certificate. Now, what that actually means is when I sent a point to site, I tried to download the VPN script before I configured the cert. No big deal. But if I deleted the gateway, it'd show up there too. So you can bust people. Okay, so that's a real simple solution for just creating a dashboard. Now let's talk about how we actually deploy that virtual machine into North Europe. Now, I'm sure everyone has created a virtual machine, at least in a management portal. There are a couple of things about the preview portal that make it a better experience, though. So if we go into Create a VM, and pricing tier finishes loading, one thing bad about it is it's all async, and it won't let you do anything until it's finished loading. There we go. All right. So now we can give it a computer name. Make sure it's nice and unique. Give it a local username and password. Now I'm going to show a couple of things that you normally don't have access, or you don't have access to with the standard management portal. The first is optional configuration. Now, if I go into optional configuration, there's a lot of settings that you've always been able to set, but you've had to set them via PowerShell. So you couldn't just arbitrarily go into the portal and configure these things. So slowly, normally isn't this bad. It's because our network is quite beat up right now.
Very quickly, is this Windows 8 or are you using Surface with, say, Windows 10?
So this is a Surface running Windows 8.
I'll be doing it on Windows
He's on
10.
Windows 10.
I got a little HP.
Yeah, we do a variety. Okay, so once I go into OS settings, you can see we can turn off Windows Update, you can change the time zone, and we can do domain join. So this is actually really beneficial if you're doing a lot of Windows-based deployments. It saves you a whole step of having to log in to the VM. And you could always do this before, but you had to do it through PowerShell. You could not do it in the preview portal or the previous portal. So here we can give some domain credentials. Oops. Give it the domain name. And obviously, your virtual network does have to have connectivity back to Azure, to Active Directory for this to work, and this one happens to be configured that way. So a couple other things we can set is under network, we can pick the virtual network that we want to deploy to, which is Consoso North Europe. And we can also go into the IP address settings. So this is another area that you could not have control over whenever you were in the previous management portal. This is brand new to the preview portal. You can set the reserved IP. You can configure public IP addresses. You can set static IPs. This is all things that you would have had to go write code before whenever you're using the old portal. So let's go ahead and set a static IP here. And need to have this on the data subnet. So now we can put it on a static IP with an IP address within that data subnet. Okay, and a few other pieces of information that are really good to know about this is a diagnostics extension. Yet another thing that you can enable previously in PowerShell, but you can do through the portal. What the diagnostics extension does is it basically installs a virtual machine extension that enables a whole lot more diagnostics capability for monitoring your VMs. So if you use, without the diagnostics extension, you basically have 5 performance metrics that you can monitor. Once you enable this, you pretty much have, I think it's in the hundreds range, your typical counters, .NET disk read-write, things like that, that you really didn't have access to before. And how it works is it installs an agent on the virtual machine, and that agent is responsible for capturing all this data, and it also includes Windows event logs, application trace logs, diagnostics logs from the actual agent itself, and it can capture your web logs, and if you have SQL Server on the VM, it can capture metrics from there too. It's a very powerful piece of software that it's just enabled by a click of the button. And one final point, and this is something you actually could do in the previous portal, is configure extensions. So this server is going to boot up, and ideally we want it to be a file server. It would be very nice to boot it up and not have it infected with malware by the time it actually is provisioned. So we can go in and enable different extensions at provision time that will install customized different things on the virtual machine. So we could, if we're using Chef Server in our environment, we could have it automatically register as Chef. Same thing with Puppet. Or in our case, I'm actually just going to install Microsoft anti-malware, so whenever the VM boots up, it's already protected. And that's pretty much it. So I just have to create the virtual machine and let it get started. Now you'll see over here on the right, or on the left, Notification Hub. Basically every event that you trigger in Azure that's asynchronous is going to show up here that it's working. So you can see all the things that you're working on, and whenever they finish, whether they succeed or fail, you'll be able to see the details here. Now, we already have a DFS server. We don't have to wait for 10 minutes for it to provision. So let me show a couple more things about this server.
Before you click on that, anybody notice point to site we're showing that we're connected?
Oh, good call. So live tile, no F5 was required. So if we go under virtual machines and we open up our DFS server, there's a few things I want to point out that's also kind of new in the preview portal. The first is that under all settings, there's actually 2 different things for restoring access. So everyone, you may or may not have run into this, but sometimes you deploy a virtual machine in Azure, you forget the username, you forget the password. What do you do with those virtual machines? How do you recover them? You actually can do that outside of the preview portal, again, through PowerShell. So if you love PowerShell, this is not the tool for you. I love PowerShell, but I still like this thing, so it's not that bad. But there's 2 features in Azure Preview Portal that you can do to unlock a VM. The first one is this reset remote access. This will actually go in, make sure that RDP is enabled on the virtual machine, open the firewall port if it's closed. So that's the first thing it does. The second setting is if you go under all settings, and down on the bottom right, there's now a password reset tile, where I can basically give it either a new username or new password, and the agent installed on the VM will automatically reset this. This is the local admin account, so it's not going to work on a domain controller, but every other VM, you can totally reset this and gain access back to your virtual machine. And it is handy. I used it quite extensively last week, recovering a couple of demos for this event.
I don't know if anybody else ever uploaded a VM to Azure and forgot to enable remote desktop protocol from Windows Firewall. You're like, oh. So, yeah, great.
Yeah, this is something that could save that too. So a couple other things I want to show real quick is just what the diagnostics counters look like. So if I open up my monitoring tile here, this is just a typical CPU percentage that you always see. But if I click Edit Chart, over on the right, you can see all the new metrics that we have. So not just the 5 typical ones, but we get .NET, we get ASP.NET, we get a lot more in-depth counters just by turning on that extension. So one more quick thing I want to show about monitoring is alerts. So all it takes to turn on an alert is click the Add Alert button. And once the alert dialog loads, or blade, sorry, the terminology here is blade. These are not dialogues. Give the alert a name and the metric. So we could do disk read write. Disk read write would probably be the most appropriate counter for a file server, but until you actually measure how many disks you have, you don't really know what the percentage is you want to monitor yet. So we can do high CPU, and here we can just give it a threshold of, so if the CPU is over 70% for past 30 minutes, send an email.
And this is going to email your service administrator and the co-administrators, and then any additional emails you put in that dialog. So you can change this up for each alert. It's awesome.
Okay, so that's kind of some basic management monitor question.
Will this tie into Operations Manager? This new diagnostic tool at all?
So the question was, does this tie into Diagnostics Manager? Or say Operations Manager, right? This specific doesn't. This is monitoring specifically just from the portal. There was an announcement yesterday. I don't know what it was yet. I haven't seen it. That does actually have some tie-in with Azure from Operations Manager, though. So it'd be good to go follow up on that because I think it's going to be a lot deeper if you're already using Operations Manager. Now, so this is pretty easy. This is how we can solve and manage and monitor our DFS server problem. So let's tackle the dev and test one real quick. And how we can do here is imagine that we have a product called PayStub that we want to allocate to either the dev and test team or to another team like a training team. How can we manage virtual machines for these people and let them have access to it without jumping through a lot of hoops? So we've already provisioned a machine that they can use. Now I want to show how we can actually deploy the PayStub application onto it relatively easily. So we can open up the PayStub Train01 VM. And has anyone used PowerShell DSC, desired state configuration? Okay, so real quick, I'm going to kind of give you a 30-second overview, not deep at all. The PowerShell DSC is a declarative model that allows you to set the state of a virtual machine through a script without writing a lot of imperative code. So in this quick example, we have a script that basically installs the IS role, it installs the ASP.NET 4.5 role, and it has another resource here called web content that's going to take the content of whatever is in this variable and deploy it to inetpub www-root. And that variable is defined in a separate file, a parameters file, and in this case it's coming from the file servers that we just deployed, so our DFS root. So what's nice about this is I can create this script one time, and no matter how many virtual machines they need, all I have to do is go back to the portal, go to all settings, go to extensions, and I can click add, and there is a PowerShell DSC extension here. And I'm basically going to upload this script as a zip and the parameters file. And now I need to tell it which configuration in that script to actually execute. And that is this name right here, website config. And I can pass in additional parameters if I want. But what's wonderful about this is it's going to go ahead and run that script on the virtual machine. I don't have to log in. I don't have to do anything else. And of course, this can be automated too. But every time I create a VM, if I don't want to invest the automation to do everything, I literally just have to run the script and they have a virtual machine there ready to go. Now, a couple more things about this training environment I want to show is there's a new feature called, relatively new, it's actually been out for a while, called role-based access control. If you're used to the previous management portal, you had the ability to add people as administrators, but if you added them as an administrator on your subscription, they had access to everything. So the payroll admin that's going to do the training, we want him to be able to manage the virtual machine, but not all the other virtual machines. So what we can do to solve this problem is really easy. We can just click the little access link here and go to roles. And if we want him to be the owner, we can open up that role, and now we can add either a user or a group. So we have a payroll admins, and this is a group that we have from on-premise AD that's been replicated up to Azure AD. This does have to be in Azure AD for it to work. And that user is part of this payroll admins group. So now they have access to this virtual machine. So if I want to validate that he has access, I can have him log in as a different user. So we can go here and now this user does not have admin rights on the subscription, just to that VM. So if you manage the old portal, he'd actually just kick you out altogether and tell you no subscription access. So if I log into the new portal, though, I do get a different experience. So I see I'm Jen Reynolds from Contoso. I can see my service health, but when I see billing load, it will slowly load. But eventually it'll load and it'll say no subscriptions because he doesn't have access to a full subscription. But if I go to Browse and Virtual Machines, you can see he's accessed PayStub Train. There's nothing else. So if I go to All Resources, the DFS server, the virtual networks, they're all gone. He doesn't see them, doesn't know they exist, but he can manage his virtual machine directly. So this is a huge improvement from a security perspective, and that's what it looks like from the user perspective if you don't actually have it. Now, one last final feature I want to show is a new, very new addition. This is called tags. So we talked about having a dev test environment, a training environment, et cetera, et cetera. We can actually tag all these different resources. And if let me pull up a virtual machine that has a tag on it. Oh, hold on. Jim doesn't have access. What a shock.
Poor Jim.
He doesn't want access. The more access you have, the more work you have. Okay, so I don't think it's going to show me in this view because the resolution, because I could see it earlier. Oh, maybe if we go down here. No, okay, so I can show you I've pre-tagged things. I don't think it's working quite well on this resolution. So if I go to Browse and Tags, you can see I've created 2 tags so far, one for environment dev and one for production. And what this allows you to do is basically tag any resource that you want. It could be a resource group, it could be a VM, a VNet, whatever level you want to manage this at. And the key is, so whenever you go look at it, you can see all the resources in your subscription that have this tag. So I can see all my dev resources or all my production resources, which in this case isn't that much, but that's kind of the general idea.
It's just another way to group things outside of just resource groups. So if you have a resource group, anybody here does any type of consulting? All right, you're probably going to get role-based access to a single resource group based upon what project you're working on, and within there you can use tags to filter down to this is this, maybe the web tier, this is the data tier. I think we had a question. Yeah.
So you showed us earlier that we can give access to the VM for a particular group.
Yes.
How about giving those group access to create only certain types of resources, kind of VMs? Is that possible?
From a creation perspective, right.
IT doesn't want to be involved in this creating.
Right.
So I can give them some kind of tool so they can play with that.
So at that point, start to go into, and I think it's called Azure Stack now, not Azure Pack. I missed the old name. You go into the scenario where you want to actually stand up your own portal and things like that and give access. There's actually I worked with some people out in Canada who that they don't have an Azure data center out there, so they're reselling Azure services with a customized portal. So if you have a scenario where you actually want to restrict like what they can see in the marketplace, as of now you would have to stand up your own type of solution for that.
Yeah, I think right now the most you can do with RBAC is existing resources. I don't think you can restrict what they can do, but I'm sure that's probably on the roadmap, though.
So let's say my dev environment, I only want to give them up to 10 machines and up to 20 processor and 20 gigs memory.
Right.
They can create 20 machines how they like it.
Right.
Yeah,
what you would do today is you would create a resource group that has these resources in it already and allow them to manage the creation or the stopping and the starting of them. Because you can make them contributors where they can basically just edit the properties. They can stop it and start it, but they can't go create new resources and delete them.
Right, so the IT still has to be involved in creating
Yeah, do the initial resource. And we'll show you at the end a template that can make these things a lot easier for you.
We can definitely talk during the Q&A part, but there's actually people who've implemented a solution like that, but you go away from the portal, you go into like a really custom solution. It's possible, definitely been done.
Okay, so that was our first scenario, just kind of high-level monitoring and managing format from an enterprise perspective. Now Sydney's going to take over and talk through some DevOps scenarios. You are on 8.
Well, if you could switch it back to 7 real quick. He tried to take me.
Yeah.
I
There
one
you go.
slide.
Sorry. I forgot he had a slide.
Let me have my slide. All right. So I was a developer for most of my career. I always joke when I talk to people about Azure that you can't really just be a dev anymore. You have to understand the operations, you have to understand release, you have to understand a lot more than your normal scope to be effective in the platform, at least in my opinion. So what I'm going to show you is the more of an operations experience for somebody who's actually managed in the workflow. And so we're going to look at this one slide. I only have one slide. And then we're going to go right into demos. So a lot of us already, we have developers. We used to go from 1 to 5. We deploy, let's ignore cloud right now. We deploy to our target instance, wherever it's IIS slot, or it's confusing. It used to be IIS website. Or whatever you want it to do. And then we started getting smarter about things. We started adding in repos. Then we started coming up with very intelligent build processes. Then we start coming up with integrated tests as part of our build processes. And now what we're starting to see the trend in the industry is number 6, that people have now automated so much of their release and build process that they're like, okay, let's actually extract some more value from this. It's a little bit easier for us to get new applications out, but let's actually get some value, metadata back from what's out there, and use that to drive the next iteration of our project. And that's really when you start getting into the Scrum Agile philosophy. And that's monitoring and improving your application. And I think this is where the preview portal really shines at number 6. So I'm going to demo to you. I think Michael really showed off number 6. I'm going to demo to you how you can do 1 through 5 without Visual Studio. Really funny fact. I tested this demo out with my iPad last week while I was on site at Build. I was able to do the whole demo on my iPad. The preview portal is really here, people. So we're going to switch over. All right. So I have a subscription here, just completely separate subscription. What I can do in here is I can go ahead and start creating my repo where I would like code to be stored. So I know this sounds really crazy, but I can go right in here, new, developer services. And even though it says developer services, project management seems to be a little bit a mix, whatever organization you have, it really depends who actually has that role. And I can go to team project. This is creating exactly what you think it is. You can create a Visual Studio Online account here, if you like, and you can create your actual project here, right in the portal. You don't have to leave. You don't have to go to VSO site. So I'm just going to call this something cool. Something cool. Oh, you know what? Is that globally unique? Come on, come on. Oh, actually, the project name doesn't need to be globally unique. I wasn't even thinking. I'm going to call the Visual Studio Online account something cool. Yeah. Somebody has that?
That one's way too cool.
Something cool, too. Anybody else do that? You just add numbers at the end until you get something unique? I don't think the customer ever sees the real name of your service. You throw whatever domain in front of there. So I'm going to call this project Web Application Stack. And it's going to actually be a project within Visual Studio Online. I can set the version control type. I like to use Git, but TFS version control is just fine here. You can set the process template. This is the same things you would set if you're doing TFS on-premise or Visual Studio Online. You can also specify the resource group. And we talked earlier about the resource group being that container resources. So whatever you create in Azure is a resource. You create a web app. You create a SQL database, a Redis cache instance. These are resources, and they live within a resource group. The resource group gives you a managed lifecycle for these resources. Just kidding. Oh. Sorry. So you get a managed lifecycle. And what that means is, let's say we spin up a QA environment, and we are for the latest release of our application, and we're done. The QA team is working on another project for a week or two. We can go in and delete that resource group, and the resource group will actually make sure all those child resources in there are removed cleanly and in order with dependencies correctly removed in the right order. That's really important because we can save costs, because sometimes it's just easier to leave it running because we don't want to have to go through the work of stacking it up again. And resource groups gives you that built in. It understands the dependency chain and deleting everything in the right order. So you get into business and start to create resource groups for your dev environment, your test environment, QA, prod. And the rabbit hole goes a whole lot deeper, and that's actually one of the last demos we're going to show, how deep that rabbit hole really goes. So for this resource group, I'm going to call this Web Stack. Hit OK. You select subscription and location. I think both of those are fine. And I don't want to pin this to Startboard. I'm just going to go ahead and create it. You know, right this way, the notification area is letting me know that something is being created. See, it's created my team project. Now, because I love you all, and I don't want to let you sit here for minutes and watch everything, be spun up, I want to go ahead and create some things in advance. So I create a resource group, and within this resource group, I have plenty of resources. So let's see if I can zoom in. Here we go. Might zoomed in a little too far. Got Redis Cache, DocDB instance, Application Insights instance, a team project, which team projects in my experience take a little bit longer to load. See, boom, there. And 2 web apps. I can actually drill into these. So if I go to the Application Insights instance, I can see some of the requests that have been made against the web applications that tie to this. So you can see some of the requests are made. This application is still pretty fairly new. Not a lot of requests yet, right? If I like things about this, just like you saw with Michael's demo, if you see something on a tile, pin it. If you see this, if you ever have to click 5 times to see some important piece of information, pin it. So I find myself always looking at this overview timeline. Okay, sure, pin it. I hit the home button, and it's on my home start board, right there. So I want to always drill in to find that same piece of information. And that's one thing you got to really like about the preview ports, a lot of consistency in implementation so that the behavior you learn in certain features is kind of repeated. So you get used to, okay, pinning stuff, reorganizing it, resizing it. Let's customize. You can resize it if you need more or less information. This one you can't resize. Too much information, but you can resize this if you need to see more or if you care for less. Let me close out of this. Oh, well, my favorite feature. This is my favorite demo. Double click. Ah, new thing. That's my favorite feature. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes when I do that. That's my favorite part of this whole thing. This is the dark theme. So now that we're in here, I went ahead and create some web apps in advance. And the one I want to show you is just a typical blank web application. I'm just suffix a DevOps. It's going to spin up here. You notice that we always have buttons at the top for the most common actions. We always have that essentials panel that we're used to give us the most common metadata that we need about that service instance. So for this web app, what's the status? Where is it located? What's the URL? Which resource group is it part of? A lot of things you'll need, like FTP hostname, things you'll need. If you set up a different type of deployment, it will actually include that. You click the URL, you'll go over there, should be a placeholder page, boom, web app successfully created. Everybody's happy. Now, I could go in here and set up continuous deployment, but anybody in here can think of a reason why I wouldn't want to set up continuous deployment against production? I think all of you can think of that reason, right? So all the demos you see, like when you go and people try to do the 5-minute demo, they set up continuous deployment in production, and you cringe in your seat, right? So we have something better, right? So if you go down, I'm going to collapse this essentials panel. We're going to go down, and we'll see a deployment section. This deployment section has a different information that's useful to me. Specifically, there's a feature called deployment slots for web apps. You might have seen this before. Deployment slots give you essentially, let's just say from a technical angle, another web app. But it's tied to this parent web app and allows you to create like a staging slot or a QA slot. Or I don't really see it used as much for dev because it's easy enough to host locally. But I see a lot used for staging and test. So I'm going to go ahead and add my staging slot. And I can clone the configuration for my parent site. So let's say I have some database connection strings or some application settings. I can clone that. So I'm going to go ahead and clone it and hit OK. And this is a very fast operation. It never fails me. The staging slot usually is spun up, boom, fast. I like that. You gotta win one every day, right? All right, staging slides up. And just like it's a web app, right? So it has its own URL. It has a suffix of -staging. It's spun up. That means we'll see the homepage for it. Everybody's happy. Now, a couple things I want to show you before I go into the actual continuous deployment demo. We have those application settings I told you about before. They're just like what you're expecting IIS, your connection strings, your application settings. One problem you have with like staging and production, well, let me backtrack a little bit. And I apologize about that. I went a little ahead of myself. One feature you have with slots that I haven't mentioned yet is swap. So let's say we get staging in there, it's verified. Everybody says good to go, let's go to production, right? How do we do this? Well, we can swap the slots. So staging is now production, old production is now staging. That sounds great, but now the new production is pointing to whatever our staging or test database is. That's bad, right? Well, we can make I've heard them called sticky settings. They're in a portal. They're referred to as slot settings. So I can add a connection string here. I can say dbcon string. And when I add this connection string, I can click slot setting. And that little G is cut off because of the resolution. What slot setting says is that this is the staging slot. Even if we swap the application, this setting stays here. And you can do the same thing in production. So that even though the application code switches, everything points to the right slot. That way you don't have to go in and make sure you write configuration files if you're a developer or if you're an ops person, make sure all the settings are in the right place. They are sticky. They stick to that slot. All right, a couple other things I want to show you. I have another web application, Agility Dev Web, where I've already set up continuous deployment and everything like that. I already have a staging slot. So you see DevOps staging. I actually have an application here. Oh, this is the, oh, it's Dev Web. Oh, I'm sorry. Agility Dev Web. This is my fault for actually naming them so close to each other. I have on my cheat sheet which one is the one I already set up and which one is the one I'm creating right now. Can't ever remember. Okay, this one is devweb.azurewebsites.net. Let me give you a bit.ly link for this. Bitly. Oh, they changed the URL. It's now Bitly. So if you want to pop this up in your mobile device, you can. Just a really simple color management application. You don't necessarily have to do it now. We're going to have at the end of this demo, I'm going to show you something really cool with staging slots. So I want to come back to this. So I have this color management application. This is like Sprint Zero. We have it with our alpha users. We're an organization that we do color swatches. We want to get out of the business of sending print booklets to people. We have the first variation. Now this is just like generic Bootstrap. We just want to get something in the first couple of customers who agreed to test it out for us hands so they can tell us what it's like so we can go ahead and get started with our first couple of sprints, build our backlog, figure things out. Where did I get this code from? Well, I did tell you that we have a team project. I have it here called Color Matcher. Color Matcher has my source code in it. But you're used to Visual Studio Online, if you have source code in team projects, you have to go to visualstudio.com, right, to see that stuff. Not anymore. All of this is in the preview portal. So this is my team project. There's my repos. There's my most recent commits. I click on the commit. Have links to the work items that has changed. Let's see. Let me do, this is one where I changed the layout. Oh, let me change that color. That's probably impossible to see right now. Hold on one second. I'm going to go home, double click to change the theme. I'm going to click active and return to my previous journey. Oh, that you normally gets an applause. That's my favorite feature. Yeah, I really like that one. That one is that's pretty cool because you don't have to remember to click through all those things again. And any journey I went on during this demo, you probably saw it when I was talking about it. It's all here. Everything I did during this demo. And it actually remembers it for 24 hours, I believe. Uh-oh, demo bug. All right, please ignore the demo bug, all right? This is new stuff, so I get to actually report a bug this afternoon. But there we go. It's showing up now. It's a slow bug. I actually changed, if you're familiar with Boot Swatch, I just changed the theme, and I went down and changed what HTML partial I used to MVC. So I did some code changes. I can actually see the diff right here. I don't have to go to visualstudio.com. Even though I like visualstudio.com, it's nice to be able to do it all in one portal. I can see the latest build. I can actually see the details for that build, including the build log. It's a lot of useful information. I'm on conference Wi-Fi, not demo Wi-Fi, so it's a little bit slow, but it's okay. You can also go down here, and you can see work items. I had a build that failed earlier today, so I have a work item assigned to me to fix that build. Here we go. So when you click the work, it's going to open up the queries tab, and it's going to open up the My Work Items query. and that's going to expand out as soon as it opens up. And it's going to show me the work item that was assigned to me. Yeah, this is a little bit slower than I wanted it to be. Let me try one more time. Here we go. Yeah?
Can you link this up to VSO and see the work items outside the portal, or is it just specific for...
No, this is VSO right here. So it is communicating with VSO and querying the work items from there.
Okay. So to start this off, did you have to establish a link to the VSO instance first?
So you can attach to an existing project if you want, or you can do like I did in the portal and create a new project. So yeah, it goes both ways. All it's doing is querying the API for it. So that one doesn't seem to be working for me. No worries. Let me show you the really fun demo. All right, so I have my dev web project. I have a production slot that we saw earlier, that in this production slot we have the application running. That's this web application right here. I have a staging slot that I can go to. I can either go by drilling down through here, or I can use the browse button to browse for staging right there. And it's going to just open up directly for me. If I'm here and I know this is the only thing I want to see, I can just expand it, just maximize that blade so I can get a little bit more metadata. Some tiles will line up beside each other as opposed to falling below each other if you do it this way. I can also minimize this blade if I'm looking at quite a few things. If you have like 7 blades on the screen, minimize. That's going to help you out. And if I go to the active tab and go back, it'll actually remember where they're minimized and maximized. So down here in the staging site, I have continuous deployment set up. It hasn't loaded up yet, but that's fine. Continuous deployment allowed me to connect this to GitHub, TFS Local, a Git Local repo, or Visual Studio Online, and set up a continuous deployment build. Now, the way it does it with Visual Studio Online, regardless if you use TFS for your source control or Git for your source control, it creates a build definition. And that build definition essentially is just a continuous build. Anytime somebody checks in code, it just drums up the build. The build has an action at the end to push to the web app. That's it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to browse, go to my project, and within my project, I'm going to make some changes. Now, this is the super secret part I haven't talked about yet. But remember, I just talked about we can see our work items, and we can see other metadata within here. I said, okay. You know what? It's easier for me to just close and reopen the portal. No worries. Well, I want to close all tabs.
Your Wi-Fi is killing you.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is killing me right now. Yeah, our speaker machine's down. No worries. So we're winging it. This is the definition of winging it. All right. We go to Browse. I'll go to my team projects down here. Under the team projects, you'll see the color matcher project that I mentioned earlier. It's going to load up. And then within the color matcher project, I can do the same thing that we do with Visual Studio Online. I can edit files in line within the portal. Now, the way we do this, the portals, is I think it's my Wi-Fi. I'm going to try it with switch machines real quick. I don't want to hold up your time, so. All right, Microsoft account sign in. I don't know what's going on. I can't connect to the speaker Wi-Fi. He can.
It's magic.
It's magic. I'm using like the latest Windows 10 build with all the like bells and whistles. Because I was installing Raspberry Pi last week. Oh, my Raspberry Pis. All right, team projects. Oh, this is much faster.
Don't speak too soon.
All right, under team projects, I have a project called Color Matcher. When I open that up, it's going to allow me to go in and edit the project.
While we're waiting for that,
Yeah.
when you created the new team project, early in the demo, you created a resource group for that team project. What is the purpose of that resource group? Is that where you're going to deploy everything to?
Oh, the resource group is just a logical container of resources in Azure.
Does it limit you to what resources you can actually deploy that project to?
It's completely logical. So for example, I can create my production environment, one resource group, and create maybe my test environment, another resource group, and maybe I could I could set up the Visual Studio project from the other resource group to connect to that first resource group. I mean, it's just logical. They don't have it doesn't actually create a sandbox. And I think that's an important distinction, so thank you for asking. It doesn't actually create a sandbox. This is just not loading up at all, so I'm going to cheat.
Maybe it's Visual Studio.
Yeah. Switch over to visualstudio.com. Actually, while we're waiting to load this up, you have a resource manager demo. Did you want to show that?
Yeah, I think Visual
We
Studio
don't want to
Online
hold up your time. Like, this is really weird.
Visual Studio Online isn't behaving. So let's talk about one final topic real quick before we wrap everything up. And this is Azure Resource Manager ARM templates, except now from a compute perspective with virtual machines. So did everyone see that last week at Build, the announcement on this? Anyone? Okay, great. So I get to announce it. So the big difference is, I guess, second question, how many of you use PowerShell to manage infrastructure as service? Okay, good crowd. So today, this is how you manage automating virtual machines, is using the Azure IaaS commandlets. And it's kind of the same concept for SQL databases and cloud services. It's all imperative code. You write a bunch of PowerShell code. You need to detect whether your storage account is there or not. If it's not, is a name available? Create it. There's a lot of low-level orchestration that you have to do to make a really fully automated deployment with PowerShell. So what's been announced recently is they've added compute providers to the Azure Resource Manager. Now, these are in preview. Azure Resource Manager itself has actually been GA for quite a few months, though. So this is basically the API now for service management to Azure. So what's really new are all the providers for virtual machines, networking, storage, things like that that you really didn't have before. So the big difference is now, instead of writing all the code to deploy your workload in an automated fashion, you are deploying or creating a template and deploying that instead. And the benefit here is the template is taken care of by the Azure Resource Manager, so all that orchestration that you would normally write yourself, you don't have to do anymore. So a little bit more why this is interesting. So a little bit, as an Azure template, this is the official terminology for them, by the way. Templates are idempotent, so you can run them over and over and over again without busting things. They simplify orchestration, massively. I can tell you, if you ever downloaded the SharePoint scripts that were up on GitHub for deploying SharePoint on Azure, I wrote those, and I can tell you how hard it was to actually automate some kind of big workload like that. It took about a month and a half, 2 months to figure out how to do that in an automated fashion. Template doesn't have to worry about that because the resource provider for compute, for storage, it's the one taking care of all that underlying orchestration. You just have to tell it what your goal state should be. I want 3 virtual machines, I want 2 SQL servers, I want availability set here, a load balancer here, and Azure Resource Manager takes care of actually doing the work for you. So it simplifies your orchestration tremendously. It also provides cross-resource configuration. What does that actually mean? It means I can have a resource group with a dependency, like a virtual network that multiple applications have a dependency on, and it will make sure that if I need to update either one or it can handle it for you. You can have nested templates, you can have cross-resource group links, all kinds of really advanced scenarios that you can do here. They're JSON-based. That doesn't mean there's not going to be some kind of GUI later. I don't know if Microsoft's going to do it or not, but it's all based on JSON. There's a schema. If you do this, there is actually a Visual Studio experience, so you get IntelliSense on which values are good and which ones not so much. A little bit more about the templates. These are source files. They are based on JSON, which means they're going to be under source control, which means you can version your infrastructure. How interesting is that? This is V1, this is V1.5, 2. That's pretty much new to the Microsoft IT Pro stack of being able to version what your infrastructure currently looks like. And one big thing that you remember about this is in the current IaaS stack with cloud services, you can have VMs in your cloud service, or you can have web and worker roles, but you can't have them in the same logical container, which is what the cloud service is. Azure resource groups, they don't really matter. It doesn't matter what kind of resources in there as long as their provider's there. And one last thing to note about them is they have parameterized input and output. So whenever you define a template, that template is going to take a lot of different information on how to deploy. Which region? What's the storage account do I use? Which VNet do I connect to? All that stuff has to be determined at runtime when you actually go to deploy it. And these are where parameters come in at. Now, just as important, they have output parameters too. So think about a resource that creates, maybe a new MySQL database. It'd be really nice to be able to pass a connection string that was just created by your previous resource to a web app that needs that as input. So you can chain the dependencies of these resources together via input and output, kind of like a pipeline. So the release was just last week. There are a lot of templates available in Visual Studio. So if you use Visual Studio today, you don't have to be a developer to, well, you kind of do, but these are literally just JSON templates. So you can go create a new project, cloud deployment, or I think it's called a templated project. I don't actually remember the project name. And they have a lot of examples, so like Windows Server with load balancer, things like that. It's not to the point where they have samples as advanced as like a SharePoint farm yet, but I think those are coming. But if you go out to GitHub under Azure/Azure-Quick Start Templates, there's a huge amount of templates already out there that you can go and provision. Now, since this is a portal talk, we don't want to spend too much time just talking about templates. We actually want to show how to create one. So let me flip over, and I'm going to show this GitHub repo. So this is a repo. Oops, I guess Zoom it's gone. Azure Quick Start -templates, and there's all these different template types. So, create an availability set, and that's another interesting aspect of the architecture is in cloud services, the current version of IaaS, all these resources are very tightly coupled. An availability set, a load balancer, they're all tied to a virtual machine or to a cloud service. In this new model, all those entities are abstract. You can create a load balancer on its own. You can create an availability set on its own. And public IPs, network adapters, and then you can piece them together for the final product. So it's a totally different architecture. So if you're do a lot of IaaS work today, you have a lot of learning to do. But if we look at these templates, creating a security group, things like that, what's nice about these, how they have this set up, is if I go into, let's see which one it was. I can barely see. So take any of these templates. There was actually a load balancer one I wanted to show. Oops.
Is it 201, 2?
I thought it was 201. Maybe it's 202. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, internal load balancer.
There we go. Okay, so what this template does, create two virtual machines under an internal load balancer and configures load balancing rules for the virtual machines. Pretty interesting. So there's two ways you can deploy this into the Azure VM or into the Azure environment. The first is there's a nice little button, Deploy to Azure. And what this does is it actually does a deep link into the management portal. And once you log in, it'll literally pop up the template and allow you to create it directly. The other alternative, if you want to download the file and play with it first, is I can open up the JSON template itself, which is, open it up in raw. I can Control-A and copy all the code. And then from the management portal, I can go into New Compute. And down here in the Azure Marketplace, and the reason we go to the Azure Marketplace is because it has a really nice search functionality. I can go and type in template. If I type in template, there's a resource here that I can use to create one of these JSON templates with. And what it's going to give me, oops, I click the template tile. Here's a starter JSON, delete that, paste in the template, and this is basically the full template that we just pasted in from GitHub. And if I scroll up, you can kind of see some of the pieces of it. You have the perimeters that we're going to need, the virtual network interface name. All this stuff is defined as part of the template itself. Now, if I hit save, the perimeters tile unlocks. And here's where it's actually going to parse through that JSON and show me the required parameters for instantiating the template. So I could say virtual network name, my Ignite VNet, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of this stuff is defined in the template itself, but you can up-level it and make it perimeters, however you want to do it.
We got a question from over there.
Question? Sure. Question, can you use this with remote app? At the moment, I do not think there is a remote app provider yet. I don't think. I can double check, but at the moment, I don't think there is. Eventually, all the services will have resource providers. So,
yeah.
Question. Does this add this to the gallery, or is this just an instance of this type of creating?
So this does not, the question was, does this add it to the gallery? And right now, this does not add anything to the gallery. So there's no gallery experience for your own custom templates yet. Right now, the only creation experience you get is through this editor. But you can basically expect to see a lot more custom gallery, custom creation of piecing these together. It's very early on, and this is basically the maximum experience you have in a portal right now. Question?
Does this only work with Azure Resource Manager APIs, or does it work with management APIs also? All the services were available through ARM?
Yeah, so the question was, does this work with old service management API or just a new ARM API? And this is only ARM. So this API does not, this is using the brand new ARM API.
Okay, so do you know when ARM is going to support cloud services?
No, I don't know. So the question was, when is ARM going to support cloud services? I do not know the answer to that one.
Yeah, it's been greatly accelerated. As a matter of fact, this week we have exponentially more services supported than even a month ago. Yeah. So it's kind of one of those things that they were waiting for this to get into the public use. Right. And I remember when it was just websites and SQL database, and that was it.
Yeah. Did you notice
you can do it like a lot?
Yeah. Did you notice that cloud services is supported in a preview portal now? So that's a good addition, but it is using the old service management API.
Just one more real quick question.
Sure.
If I understand this right, the load balancer and the VMs are not tied to a cloud service in this model?
There is no such thing as a cloud service anymore in this model.
The resource group is creating that, is replacing the cloud service.
So the resource group, you're correct. The resource group is now the logical container for your virtual machines. So if you want to load balance a set of virtual machines, you'll tie them to a load balancer and to an availability set. That's how you'll do it.
They're not wrapped in the cloud.
Yep, they're no longer wrapped in a cloud service.
But if you think about it, the cloud service essentially was doing the same thing. The cloud service acted as a load balancer and it acted as a logical grouping for the VM. So this is kind of making it more direct and give you exact control on, do you really want that public load balancer? Do you really want an internal load balancer? It kind of gives you a little bit more minute control. It makes it really obvious to you what's going on, where I felt like cloud services for a while obfuscated that a bit.
Yeah. And they were very confusing. So this is much more logical. This is what you would do if they were physical entities. You would have different racks for availability sets, and you'd have a load balancer. So this is just a software. The logical entities make a lot better representation. Okay, so let me go ahead and finish the deployment real quick. So we can go ahead and specify the load balancer name that we'll create, and just like normal, we're going to specify the demo username and the password. If I could type.
So this is all JSON. The schema has been available on MSDN for a while now. So this has been in public preview for a while. So you can actually, if you have devs on your team who want to, you can go get the JSON schema and learn how this works and do it by hand. I don't know if you always want to do it by hand, but you start these examples on GitHub is just there to get you started. You can build way more complex applications.
Right. Now, if you look at the different parameters, notice a lot of these have default values specified. Microsoft Windows Server, backend VM, image offer. These are basically whenever you define parameters in a template, you can give them a default value, and that means I don't have to fill them in. It's going to use whatever's in there. You can also give it a list of allowed choices. So if I have an instance size, I don't think they did it in this template, but if I had an instance size, I could literally give it standard A1 through standard A5 or only the DS instances, and literally you could not pick any other option. You make them, restrict them down to a supported choice, for instance. So these are very powerful on what you can do with the input parameters. What's that? Can you validate input? There are some language operators. I don't remember if there's a regex in there or not. There's a concat and all the other typicals. I don't remember if there's a regex or not, though. So it would make sense, though. So it probably is, but would have to double check. So I'll give it a resource group name and pick the region that I want to deploy this to. And that's going to create our template. Now, one thing I want to show that's a little different if you go try this out. Because I've already deployed this template. If I go and I look in my browse virtual machines, it's not going to be there. Excuse me. To see virtual machines that are created using the ARM API, they have a new construct in the portal, and everything is labeled V2. So this is actually pretty interesting. So it means basically you can't deploy an ARM virtual machine onto a storage account that wasn't created in V1. Same thing with VNets. There's definitely going to be a migration story that you're going to have to figure out. But from a management perspective in the portal, if I go under virtual machines, This is using RDFE, or the standard API. If I go under Virtual Machines v2, this is using ARM. So it's definitely going to take some transition to figure out how this works together. But these are the two virtual machines that I actually created earlier before the demo. Now, one more thing I'll show is like network interfaces. Here's the different NIC cards that I've created, or network adapters. If you go into load balancers, v2, all these entities that are standalone are manageable on their own. So I can open up the VMILB, this just an internal load balancer, and this is, especially if you're comparing to the old management portal, this is a huge improvement because I can actually go in here and change my NAT rules for inbound, NATbound, configure my health probes. It's just a much better experience.
Now, I do have the code thing up.
Does yours work?
Yeah, I had to switch to my cell phone connection. I don't know. Yeah.
Is there a way to see the cost of each VMs you just deployed?
Yeah, so if you go in, it's not going to be an exact cost because it doesn't keep track of it that well. But if you go into Browse, Resource Groups, and that's one of the benefits of the resource group container, is it actually will attempt to tell you how much you're spending on the resources in it.
Yeah, while you're showing that, I had another question.
I do not think it's tied into your EA rate. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I don't think it is. But that's a follow-up question we'd have to follow up on. So any other questions about ARM before we switch back to doing a little DevOps? Oh, and that's what that billing looks like.
Is a template always tied to just a single resource group?
A template is not tied to a resource group. So a template is just, think of it like if you're a developer, it's a class. The resource group is the instantiation. So you can take that template and run it over and over again and create 15, 20, 100 resource groups based off of it. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the big advantages there. So let's go back to talk about this from a DevOps perspective. Thanks, Mike. Can you hit the button number 8? Yeah. From a DevOps perspective, we have production that we created with a template. We want to source control that template so we know exactly at a point in time where production looked like, which template we used to create our production. That way, if we need a dev or QA environment, we just spin out that same template and create it over and over again. So you start to see how you can create reproducible environments pretty quickly without having to do any manual intervention. And then in Dev and QA, if you find out you need some new resources, you go update your template, try it out Dev QA. Once you're ready, you spin up a new production environment and kill off the old production environment in whatever way you deem appropriate. So these resource groups give you containers to move around when you start figuring out your ops process. And it's awesome in that sense. I wanted to show you the team projects earlier, and you know how conference Wi-Fi goes. So I'm on my LTE connection, and it's working beautifully. So what I did earlier was I made a change to my repo. So remember earlier I said that in continuous deployment, the way it works is it creates a build definition, and anytime you check in, it kicks off that build. So my build definition, when I click on it, you'll see my queued up requests to do a build and any active builds that are running. Now, I'll just click away real quick. And that's Agility Dev Web staging environment _ CD for continuous deployment. Oh, this was working a second ago. Don't do this to me.
They could be, the resource groups can be really however you want to organize it, right? Think of a resource group you can think of it at an organization level. So if you have different teams that have different applications, you could have a different resource group for that. If it was me, I would have a different resource group for dev and test, because the general idea of how you group these resources is based on the common life cycle of the resources in it. If the database doesn't make sense without the website, and the website doesn't make sense without the database, then it should be in the same resource group. And if you have a production and a dev, yeah, they might be the same database, but they definitely have different data in them. So the life cycles are going to be completely different. So you'd want to split those up into different resource groups.
Okay. So in that case, the VSO instance would be the same.
What's that?
The VSO instance would be the same.
Well, in this case, you're probably not going to have a VSO instance in your production deployment, because you're not going to deploy from source control to production, right? Question?
Yeah, question. When you do the deployment with the Azure portal here, can you put that into a release management release pipeline?
For Visual Studio Release Management?
Yeah.
Yes. There is a release management online, actually, that'll allow you to hook all that stuff together.
Yeah, but can you see the release pipeline from the portal?
I don't know. I don't think you can.
I'm not
Is there
too
any
deep on
portal
release
integration with release management?
Well, I'm not deep on release management yet. All right,
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to show, and then we're actually running out of time, is you can edit code directly here within the portal. So sorry I didn't have an exact answer for that. I haven't gotten to play with release management yet. I'm really jealous of those who have. I'm so busy in the portal stuff. So you can actually go in and you have an editing experience from the new portal. So you can go in, click edit, make changes, revert those changes. Let's see, I don't want to edit application insights, that's CSHTML, but I do want to edit this file. I chose a bootstrap theme, I'm going to choose another one, and maybe the title, color management express. I don't know, that sounds good to me.
Sure.
Give it a real commit name, new title, hit OK, and it's going to make a commit. So you're going to see over here on the notification side, that was my commit from earlier. Once the commit goes in, everything's going to light up green. Everybody's going to be happy. Now, once that commit goes in, naturally what's going to happen is the build definition is going to trigger a new build. So if you click down here, actually I have two files that are editing. Let me revert this file. If I go down here, we'll see the builds, which don't seem to be working for me today.
But you would see a new build there.
Yeah, it was some. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
All right. Whew. Now we can close. We can finish up. Oh man. So those are actually the builds from earlier today that I did. That's the request that I just put in. It's actually been queued up for 7 minutes. When you're in an automated ops release like this, since everything's automated, it doesn't really matter how long it's queued up or how long the build takes. Usually, that only matters is if you have to do any type of manual intervention before or after the build. But yeah, once we make any changes, they'll show up in the staging slide, which will be available to us. We don't have enough time left because of the little Wi-Fi issue I had. But the other thing I wanted to show you, I'm going to just show it to you in a portal. I challenge you to try this out yourself. This is one of my favorite new features. And then this will be enough, we can call it a day, right? Under web apps, if you go to your web application, this one was called DevWeb. Come on, web apps, load up. And we're really running close on time. I don't want you. Oh, there we go. I don't want you to be late to lunch. Under web apps, you can actually customize, or this is actually true for any resource blade. You can right-click the blade and customize. So this allows you to actually regroup sections, move them up and down. Maybe I want monitoring to be at top. Maybe I want deployment to be at the top. Mark that as done. I moved deployment. I demoted deployment, right? I can go in. I can add tiles. See a little experience right here where I can drag in tiles from other places. Anybody like Kudu, you can go into the console right here directly through the portal. My favorite one is traffic routing. This is pretty neat. Now, what traffic routing does is that staging slide I showed you, and I'm getting that 1 minute warning right now. Traffic routing allows you to indicate what slot you want to use and how you want to split traffic amongst the slots. Anybody here do A/B testing or anything like that? A lot of organizations like to actually spread the traffic to the new production and the original production. Traffic routing will allow you to do that. Let me hit done so I can go in here and show you the interface. You basically, right now, 100% of my traffic goes to production. I choose the deployment slot. You know what? Let's fast forward our imagination. We're really far along, and 85% of our traffic is going to staging. I've done it with organizations where we do like 15% at a time. We actually do it, last time I done it was 15% every 2 hours. It was kind of good for us because it was enough customers to see if anything's wrong, and then some organizations will get to 50 and then flip over to 100. Every organization does it different. Hit save. So 85% of my traffic to the original URL will go to the staging site instead of the original site. So as far as the customer is concerned, they go to your original URL, whether it's your domain name or the AzureWebsites.net URL, but they may be routed to staging, and my build's not done yet, but they may be routed to staging, they may be routed to production. Eventually, you can do a swap and do it 100% production. So this allows you to ease customers on to the newest release of your application. So yeah.
All right. So they blew up our presenter machine, so we don't actually have a slide with the cool QR code. So use your app, make sure you do an eval, and that's it. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming by.